Can you go through remedies for breach of contract? So remedies for breach of contract. So first of all, what is breach of contract? Breach of contract is when somebody does not fulfill their requirements when it comes to the contract, right? For example, there's a contract between the seller and the buyer. The seller is supposed to do something, fix the door, right? And they don't fix it. Or the buyer is supposed to take possession of the property. They don't. There's a breach of contract. So one party doesn't fulfill their requirements under the contract. So that's your breach of contract, right? So first, that's important. Now, so what happens when there's a breach of contract? So let's say the sellers have agreed to sell their house to the buyers. Between the time that they sign the contract and the possession time, the market's gone up. Now they say, oh, you know what, we don't want to sell our house to you. Somebody else has offered us an extra $100,000. We will sell it to those buyers. So that's a breach of contract, right? So in this case, remedies for breach of contract means then this case will then go to court. Then court will decide on what happens. So when the case goes to court, now court will have different options that the court can provide, right? So the remedy, so those are called remedies for breach of contract. So the first remedy is monetary damages. So let's say the buyer was supposed to take possession of the house and they back out like at the time of possession. They say, we don't want to buy the property, maybe because the prices have dropped, right? So they don't want to take possession of the property. They say, no, we're not going to fulfill the contract. So in this case, the seller will take the buyer to the court, and the court will say, well, so let's say then they go and sell the house to another buyer because the original buyer did not close on the property. They sell it to another buyer and they lost $50,000. So they, let's say the house, the contract was for 500. The buyer backed out. They had to sell it to another buyer and they could only sell it for 450,000. So in this case, the sellers can take the original buyers to court and they say they made us lose the money, which is correct. So in this case, 50,000 is the amount that they have lost. The court can award monetary damages to the seller. So they will say the buyer has to pay the seller $50,000. There was a case in Ontario where that happened, where the builders actually, the buyers refused to close on the property and the builders could only sell the house for $150,000 lower. And they took the buyer to court and the court said the buyer had to pay $150,000 to the builder or the seller in this case. So that's called monetary damages, where the court will say you have to pay X amount of dollars because that's the loss they have suffered. And this has to be actual loss that is suffered, not pain and suffering or anything like that, actual loss that they have suffered. So that's one. So that's called monetary damages. The second one is quantum merit. Quantum merit, very important. Quantum merit is quantity that is merited, right? So let's say you hire somebody to do your floors. Okay, so you're going to do hardwood floors or vinyl floors in your house. You hired a person to do the floors. So let's say you have two-story house. So they did the main floor. Then you had an argument with them. The guy left in a huff. That has happened to me once, where the framer left because they didn't because they were supposed to do other stuff for us, and anyway, I didn't want to give him the contract to him because he was not doing a good job. So anyways, the guy got mad and he just left in the middle of the job, which then he later came back and apologized. But anyway, so there's things like this can happen where the contractor leaves in the middle of the job, right? So in this case, if the contractor has done half the work, so let's say you say, I'm not going to pay you, which is what I would say as well, but technically you cannot pay them. You have to pay them for the amount of work they have done. So in this case, you say, I'm not going to pay you, and they take you to court. The court will say, well, he did half the work, so he is owed half the money. You can't say, I'm not going to pay you. You have to pay them half the money. So you have to pay them for quantity, or you have to pay them quantity that is merited. That means the quantum merit, quantity that's merited. That means if they did half the work, you owe them half the money. If they did quarter of the work, you owe them quarter of the money. If they did 95% of the work, then you owe them 95% of the money. So that is called quantum merit, or quantity that is merited, right? The fair amount, fair value of the work that has been done. Third one is specific performance. So in this case, let's go back to the example we were looking at before. So in this case, so let's say sellers had a contract with the buyers to sell the property for 500,000. Okay, and they had 60-day closing, so they would take possession. The buyers would take possession in 2 months. In this case, the market went up, right? Shot up. And then another buyer came and offered them an extra $100,000 for the same property. So now the property that they had a contract for 500,000 for, now they can sell the same property for 600,000. Okay. So in this case, the sellers are like, wow, I want that offer. Like, I like that better. So, well, you can do that. You have a signed contract, which you have to honor. But if they say to buyers, well, we're not selling you the property, the buyers can then take the sellers to court, and the court will look at the situation, because if the buyers were to go buy another similar property, it will cost them an extra 100,000. Right. So in this case, there are two options the court will have. One is monetary damages if they were to go buy another house, or the second would be if they haven't yet bought the house and the contract hasn't closed with the previous, like the new owners that the sellers are selling it to. The court has an option of what's called specific performance. That means the court is forcing the sellers to carry out their promise or contract. The court will say to the sellers, well, you did make this commitment to them. You signed a contract. This is a legal document. You cannot backtrack now. So you have to sell the house to the original buyers, and you cannot accept the second offer. The second offer will get canceled. So that's called specific performance, where the court will force the sellers to sell the house, right? Or the court will force the guilty party to perform their promise. So that's called specific performance. So where the court is forcing the party to carry out the contract. So that's called specific performance. And then there's another one called injunction, right? So in the last example that we looked at, so let's say the sellers did not want to continue with the contract with the original buyers. They wanted to sell to the new buyers that were offering 100,000 more, right? So in this case, the court will give an injunction for the second contract, right? So injunction means stop, right? You cannot move forward with that. So they will give injunction to the new buyers and say, no, your contract is not valid. You have to stop. You cannot continue with that. But they will give specific performance to original buyers, right? So there can be multiple things going on in the same, because it's a complex scenario. So they will say original buyers, specific performance. The seller has to perform the contract, which means they have to fulfill their promise and sell the house to them. They cannot sell the house to the new one. So that's an injunction. They're stopping the contract from moving forward. Okay. So that's called injunction, where the court will make them stop from proceeding with the contract.